Hello and welcome to my talk. It will be about cultural aspects and I would say even more challenges of DevOps transformation. So I would like to start with some story and I wanted to ask the audience if you by any chance know what this jet is or heard about anything. Yes, please. Yeah, so you're correct. It's actually the same model we're talking about. It's Boeing 737 MAX. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this, because I wanted to show you the series of events which happened with this particular case. First of all, it's good to know that it was produced back in 2017 and actually had already several flights, but after two crashes, which happened, I think, as far as I recall, in 2018 and beginning of 2019, which actually leads to 346 persons died. This flight, Boeing Corporation was actually obligated to ground by the regulatory authorities of the world until further investigation. So what happened next? Because I was following a lot of the series of events afterwards, and there was an interesting titles in the several newsletters about that Boeing MAX software was actually outsourced to $9 an hour engineers, or basically big outsourcers, for example, in India. And then there was another interesting incident raised in one of the newsletters about former Boeing MAX engineer saying that he was incredibly pressurized to keep costs down and downplay new features to avoid scrutiny of the regulations, which is also a very interesting story. But by the end of the day, let's think about it. Is it really a manufacturing problem, or maybe it's a cultural problem of this organization? And if we think about a little bit on what happened inside the organization, and actually there was some also articles saying that the previous employee statement, Boeing Corporation actually declined and said it's not true. Most probably there was some blame game happening within the company, and until they haven't figured out how to communicate what's next and how they're gonna tackle this challenge, they probably played that game a lot. And then another interesting thing appeared on iCombinator newsletter about former software engineer recalling one manager saying at all hands meeting that Boeing didn't need senior engineers because its products were mature. And he was obviously shocked with that statement, and in a room full of a couple of hundred, mostly senior engineers, they were being told that they are not needed. So think about it from the cultural perspective. And speaking about business value of this case, the reality is that all the newly branded jets probably are not operable and standing somewhere in the airport hub waiting to be delivered. So no value basically was delivered. So now I'm gonna introduce myself. My name is Nataliya. I originally, I was born in Moldova, raised in Ukraine, and now live in Sweden. And I work as a tech manager in the company, a Swedish company called iZettle. We actually have offices in Stockholm and Edinburgh. So what's wrong with the transformations? Most important thing probably is understand that most of the transformations rely on the culture of organizations. If you have a culture like this with the bad habits, bad decisions, and toxic people, how are you gonna survive? Actually, culture is how organizations do things rather than what's behind those cultural values as well. So it's a lot of things, especially if you think about your current organization, probably you have a values, a kind of mission and vision statement, but think about the cultural aspects of those statements and how they apply to day-to-day job of the employees of this company. Most of the transformation also fails because of the complexity. And here I wanted to talk a little bit more about so-called Canadian framework, which was originated from Dave Snowden's work at IBM. He basically defined that each and every organization resists in a certain domain. Some domains are complex, loosely coupled, some domains are complicated, some of them are chaotic, and some of them are obvious, and in the middle of it, there is a disorder. And again, if we will look at the nature, probably we will see that it's not only about human organizations, but also it's about how nature self-organizes. And that in the nature, or even birds, they are trying to align according to the current needs rather than be focusing on a long-term plan and strategies. So most of the transformations are also about people and communication, but not actually about technology and tools. For example, next time you will get a new team member joining one of your teams, think about how much complexity you are adding to the connections and communications in your team. And most of the organization also used to approach their current hierarchies as org charts. And as you can see, sometimes it's just simple mapping of the direct reports to the managers. But how about thinking of it in another direction? Actually think about how communications are built without your organizations. As Mel Conway once said, organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structures of these organizations. And there was another statement from him saying that Conway's law, the law before, creates an imperative to keep asking, is there a better design that is not available to us because of our organization? Think about it. And now speaking about DevOps, DevOps is actually also a culture. And it's a culture which encourages collaboration and shared responsibility. So, as once Werner Vogel said, you build it and you run it. But we have this 10 years challenge because as far as I recall, first mentioning of DevOps as a term was 10 years ago, actually on the same community event called DevOps Days Kent. And since then, what actually changed within community or like within the definition of DevOps between the different organizations? As you can see, DevOps sometimes is still a job title. DevOps team work in silos sometimes. Also, some teams even stating that they think they don't need ops at all. And we are busy. We don't have time for experimenting within those teams usually. Here are several anti-patterns, which are called also as a DevOps topologies. I highly recommend, if you have never heard of it, take a look on the website, on the bottom of the slide. But what exactly it's stating is that the way you organize in DevOps teams or the DevOps organizations actually highly applies to the results of this organization. For example, you can have a separated silos, which is quite usual in many companies. You have separated dev and ops teams, not really interacting that much together. And then there might be another situation when you have separate DevOps silos. You're kind of trying to build DevOps, but it's somewhere in between. And probably it's even a small dedicated team, but it's really hard to collaborate between ops and dev still. And then there is, again, organizations which are stating, oh, we don't need ops anymore. Let's just assume by moving DevOps to the development team, problem is fixed. So how are we gonna tackle this challenge? I would say, first of all, if you as a previous speaker said, if you are, for example, in stressful situation or you have a challenge in your current organization, sit somewhere in the quiet place and self-reflect and talk to yourself and actually use the serenity prayer statement, which is saying that, Lord, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. So, how are you going to understand your organizational concerns? Here, I wanted to suggest some practice which was raised in the Esther Derby recent book, which is called 7 Rules for Positive, Productive Change. And it's stating that you should ask yourself, what's the set of concerns for your current organization? For example, you should ask, how do we achieve clarity so people know what to do? Or what conditions are necessary for people to do actually good work? What productive constraints will streamline decision-making and serve as the guiding principles? And one of the tactics she actually suggesting as well in that book is called theme model, which is basically a top-down model built from steering, enabling, and enhancing and making. Again, if you will try to apply it to your current organization, treat it as steering part is probably your visionary statement. Usually there is a certain part of organization which is setting this visionary statement, for example, CTO or VP of engineering. Then there is enabling and enhancing. This part is actually interesting because it's responsible for priorities and ensuring that the teams are actually capable of delivering steering, vision, and basically get what they need to in terms of competence and internal knowledge. And then there is another part, which is actually making. Making is like delivering actual business value. So I know that there are actually some organizations where all of those domains are responsibilities of the team, not only management versus teams. So build teams based on their communication patterns. So you would ask, what is communication pattern? And again, I would like to refer to the DevOps topologies, which is stating that there might be several ways you can tackle communication in your teams. One might be smooth collaboration, when actually you still have dev and ops team collaborating with each other a lot. Then you might have choose another way with fully embedded team, which you call DevOps. And then there might be temporary DevOps team in the middle, which is actually facilitating and acting as a DevOps evangelists. So again, it's plenty of options. It's a matter of where you are right now as an organization, how mature you are in your technical stack, and how management is good in it. And then again, back to the Melvin Conway, he stated once that the design is almost never the best possible. Therefore, flexibility of organization is important to effective design. So here are some actually great patterns from team topologies. I really like to stop on them each and every, and maybe provide some cases from like particular examples. But mostly it's three patterns. One is called collaboration, another one is X as a service, and then it's facilitating. So let's stop on collaboration pattern. Collaboration pattern actually means that dev and ops teams collaborate a lot on day-to-day business. So they work closely together, and it's very important, I should emphasize it, that they have shared goal within the company. And then ops, it's actually work both ways. Ops people and dev people should be very comfortable pairing again on the day-to-day business. And then org probably have to have a really strong technical leadership to enable this setup. Let's take a look at the second pattern, which is stating that ops as an X as a service team, which in reality usually also called infrastructure as a service. In this pattern, as you can see, you actually have a DevOps rather as a cultural or mindset within the dev team, and then you have ops team still responsible for infrastructure as a service. Sometimes those teams are even called infrastructure as a service teams. And also they provide a really elastic infra platform, and most probably this organization is already using some cloud provider for development like AWS or Google Cloud, which of course offloads this infrastructure as a service team because then they can actually focus on the platform. And then we have this concept of virtual DevOps team within dev so that in the dev team, people communicate with some group, I would say a virtual part of the team communicates a lot on day-to-day business with infrastructure as a service team. Usually this kind of setup is highly recommended for organizations which are traditional with ops departments, and maybe they have a lot of legacy which they still need to support. But then you're still working on this DevOps part of the mindset for the whole organization. And then finally, last pattern is called facilitation. What does it mean? It means that most probably you have a facilitating team somewhere on organization, which main responsibility is to educate both dev and ops teams in what is actual DevOps, and the end goal of this team should be probably just enablement of the mindset, and then maybe this team don't need to exist anymore in the future. So it might have an expiration date, actually. And yeah, and now I want to talk more a little bit why experimentations and continuous learning is important in the cultural transformations. So, for example, you work in cross-functional teams, and actually it applies for operations team as well, but you really want to experiment with your new ideas. And for example, one of the experiments might be this new topology which you're trying to set up an organization. So try to approach all those problems as an experiment. You can always experiment and organize, for example, around infrastructure as a service team and development team. Even though this experiment might fail, you can always learn and start over. So this should be a part of the mindset, I guess, as well. And again, as Esther Derby once said, experiments provide fast feedback, are inexpensive ideally, and require no permission and are easy to run. So it's contributing to the fact how I'm gonna convince my manager if I want to experiment with a new team topology. And another important cycle, which is called double loop learning cycle, or contributes a lot to continuous learning as a mindset. So instead of having only single loop, when you have an assumptions, and then you do some actions in order to achieve some result, you are switching back to assumptions, you can actually do a double loop. Another loop would be from results to actions. Can we do what we are doing better? Which again contributes on how we're organized probably as well. Can we even think about maybe we should just be organized differently? It's not only about assumptions and results. And then important thing which helps build up an empathy is understanding your customer. So here I wanted just to share a really awesome tool which is called Empathy Map Canvas. Usually it's been heavily used for product part of organization. However, I think it might be used also for building the bridge between dev and ops. So basically ops might use it as if they have a trouble to understand what's their customer, and their customers sometimes are developers. And then it's important to have a safe to fail environment. Sometimes, as it was said in the previous talk today, we call it also fail fast and fail often, which means it should be safe to fail within your organization, including with your team reorganization or reorganizations overall. And you should be able to also to build a culture of psychological safety and actually enable people to be yourself, take risks, make mistakes, raise problems, sometimes even disagree, and ask questions. So here are books which I highly recommend, which I was inspired by making my talk actually with. One of them is called Team Topology. It's fresh new, from Matt Skelton and Manuel Pei. I highly recommend it to look at it if you're interested in those kind of different setup of DevOps teams and also overall the theory behind the team topologies. Another book is called 7 Rules of Positive and Productive Change from Esther Derby. This one will help you on how you can approach the change within your organization and support your people on the psychological level as well. And then famous one probably for you already known, DevOps Handbook from Jess Humble and several authors. This one I would also highly recommend because I was completely amazed by the ideas from that book back in the times when I first read it. So, to conclude, I think it's really not easy. And also we need to understand that it wouldn't be comfortable for most of us, but it's challenging. Thank you.